Okay. It's obviously not Monday. Yesterday was my birthday, so I just decided to take the day off from making a video about Calm My Anxious Heart. So I decided to do it tonight. About chapter 6. I will try and not scratch my head as often as I did last time. I thought that was kind of funny, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with my head, I promise. All my hair's nice and everything. It's just, that's what I did during that video. And I also adjust my glasses a lot too, so that's just one of those things. But anyway, this chapter in Calm My Anxious Heart is titled Never Enough. And at this point in time in the book, she's going to start focusing on the barriers that keep us from experiencing contentment. We've talked about the areas where we need contentment, our circumstances, the chapter that was content to be me, our roles in life, and our relationships. She says now it's time to focus on the barriers that keep us from experiencing contentment. Immanuel Kant said, "Give a man everything he wants, and at that moment, everything will not be everything." So this chapter is about greed. And she talks, the Webster's Dictionary defines greed as a strong desire for more, especially for more than is right. She mentions Proverbs 30 verse 15, and I'd never really paid much attention to this verse before, but it says, "The leech has two daughters, give and give." And the little footnotes in my Bible describe this as a reference to the fact that a leech, like, it can suck your blood from both ends of its body, and it just seems that its main purpose is just to devour. And that's what greed is. Greed is a blood-sucking worm that's only purpose is just to devour. It seems that's the description that's being made there in that verse, and I thought that was kind of interesting. Never heard that one before. Never heard a sermon series done on that one before, but it would be kind of interesting, I think. She says, in his excellent book called Margin, Dr. Richard Swenson made this statement: "At last count, there were about 210 countries in the world. Every year, Americans spend more on trash bags than the individual gross national product of 90 of these countries. Even more astoundingly, we spend more on eating out than the individual gross national product of 200 of these nations. We have acquired as a nation so much that we spend more money on the containers to throw away our garbage than 90 of the 210 countries. Now, have it that they have as their gross national product." No, what I thought was interesting about this is that we have so much that we throw away more than most people own. And this book was written in 1998. So 23 years ago. So imagine how much more of a gross statistic that would be in this day and age. To Americans, she says, usually tragedy is wanting something very badly and not getting it. And that is what is considered tragedy. It's a very sad description. It's probably true. The times in my life where I realized how happy I was that I didn't have a lot, were pretty amazing. And the happiness of others around me that didn't have a lot. as far as living in Kenya, just the joy in those people, not even realizing what was out there that they could potentially have. And it didn't matter to them because they didn't know what they were missing. And that's what greed is, really, wanting what we're missing because we can see that it's there, but we can't have it. And also, I think about when George and I were living in Houston, and we were living in this small little garage apartment, and it was so nice to not have to worry about keeping a big, huge, giant house clean or anything. It was nice to be in that little confined space with each other, and we actually got to know each other better and got to learn how to communicate better. We couldn't walk off and ignore each other when we got mad at each other because, like, it was basically 3 rooms, this entire little apartment. So we couldn't get away from each other, and it was actually a good thing for our communication. So just the idea that we have so much excess in this country and we can see it all around us, and so we become greedy for it and we become envious for it, and it's just this downward spiral that always leads to discontentment unless we can rein it in. She goes on to say, not only do we want more, but we aren't willing to wait for it either. We aren't willing to save. We pay with credit cards. We can't manage the kid inside us. So we just grow up. We don't grow up. We become adults, and there's still this kid, in the candy shop that just wants more and more and more. And when we're in debt, we become money's servant. We want things that are more and better and easier, and greed really does make a barrier in our lives that keeps us from being content with what God has given to us. Bring on the convenience, right? She says here, how do we keep our hearts centered on God with a thankfulness for what He has given instead of acquiring more and more? She said the only way to do this is to keep God's perspective in our hearts and to burn it into our minds. So then she goes on to give a few things about God's perspective of abundance as it's found in the Bible. It says here, 16 of the 39 parables told by Jesus deal with wealth. So He obviously knows that we need help with our temptation to be greedy. The first thing that she talks about with His perspective on abundance is that everything belongs to Him. 1 Chronicles 29, verse 11 through 14 says, yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor, for everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, O Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. Everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. Everything's only on loan to us from God. And then she says, a question which really completely floors me. She said, the question we need to ponder is not how much should I give, but how much should I keep? I've been thinking a lot about that lately, as far as us moving from place to place and packing up our house that we just sold. Excuse me. Packing up our house that we just sold and moving all of our things into the basement here at my aunt's house. And how much should we keep? I started to really struggle with things. I wanted to give things away, and I gave away several things to the thrift store. And there were a few things that I just couldn't give away. Like, I had this sentimental attachment to them, which is okay. But it's okay to, I don't think God was asking me to give those things away. If he was, and I still held on to them, then that would have been disobedient. But just this question, the thought of, because everything belongs to God, the question should be not how much should I give from what I have, but how much should I keep because it's his. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights. That's James 1, verse 16 and 17. Not only does everything belong to God, but the attitude of our heart is the issue that God is concerned about. Psalm 62:10 says, though your riches increase, do not set your hearts on them. And then Jesus said in Matthew 6, verse 21, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So we need to ask, where's my treasure? Where's my heart? If what I see around me was lost or destroyed or stolen tomorrow, she asks, would I miss it to the point that it would harm my trust in God, my contentment, or my relationships? If those things were lost, destroyed, or stolen tomorrow, and it did harm my trust in God, my contentment, or my relationships, then probably my treasure is on earth instead of in heaven where it needs to be. The third principle about God's perspective on abundance is that God comes first and possessions always come second. Matthew 6:24 says you can't serve both God and money. You can't serve two masters. The phrase doesn't go, money is the root of all evil. It's the love of money that's the root of all evil. That's 1 Timothy 6:10. We need to be content with what we have, she says, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. That's Hebrews 13:5. And she said, the next sentence here is funny because, I was really trying to think. I was trying to think about myself and, where has greed risen up in me lately. And, hold on just a second. I don't know what your camera does when something pops up on the screen in front of the camera. I have no idea what happens, if the camera actually shows that or not, but I had a pop-up that showed up on the screen, so I had to get rid of it. Okay, so I've been thinking about, search me, O God, and know my heart. See if there's any offensive way in me. So I've been thinking about greed since this chapter was on greed, and I thought, what, I'm probably doing okay. And then I see this sign in this next sentence in here that says, has your house, your dining room set, your beautiful new clothing ever said, I will never leave you, like God has said? I don't know. I just thought it was funny because, we just sold our house and I have a little extra money to spend. And two of the things that I wanted to buy was a new dining set and some new clothes. So, I always think that, that I'm doing okay with greed, but maybe God has a different perspective on it, and I need to think about that a little bit longer. The fourth principle that she's written here are that possessions are to be used and not loved. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. That's Luke 12, verse 15. A.W. Tozer once said, within the human heart, things have taken over. God's gifts now take the place of God, and the whole course of nature is upset by the monstrous substitution. Monstrous substitution. I like that phrase. We have mixed up what we serve and what we use. Sadly, many serve things and use God, but the scriptures instruct us to do just the opposite. That's a very wise thought. Do we serve things and use God instead of serving God and using things? Our possessions meant to be just looked at and treasured and loved. And what are we using them for? How are we using them for God's kingdom? Proverbs 30 verses 8 and 9 say, "Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise I may have too much and disown you, and say, 'Who is the Lord?' Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God." So God has these principles in Scripture. His perspective on abundance, that everything belongs to Him, that our heart attitude is the issue, that God comes first and possessions come second, and that possessions are to be used and not loved. But we still haven't really answered the question, what is God's standard for Christians? She says, God leads each person differently on how to give. He leads each person differently on what vocation they have, what ability to make money they have, what abilities they have to acquire things. He leads each person differently. But she says He won't lead us in how we are to give and use those resources if we aren't even asking the questions. So when it becomes a point of, are we being greedy? Are we thinking too much about our material possessions? Are we not giving things away? He won't lead us if we aren't asking those questions of ourselves. So we need to ask God, okay, it's yours. What do you want me to do with it? So we need to search our hearts, she says. I encourage you to read Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24, and pray, God, show me where my treasure is. Help me be honest. Show me what I can do at my house to unlatch the leash of greed from me and my family. So then she goes through a few things of, the things to get rid of in your house, maybe cutting up credit cards, being aware and being very perceptive about how greedy we are about Christmas gifts, and are we overspending with gifts that we do any time of the year. She says, brainstorm with friends about how you can say enough to overspending for gifts. Everyone's home needs a house cleaning to keep the greedy leech away. She talks about teaching our children and the people that we have influence over to be grateful for blessings instead of complaining. She talks about keeping a gratitude journal. She talks about sharing our wealth. She says one thing here that was interesting. She quoted 1 Timothy 6, verses 17 through 19. I'll read that first. She says, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life." And then this is what I thought was funny. She said, "We see in the Old Testament that God appointed different amounts of wealth to different servants. Daniel and Joseph were granted great wealth. Ezekiel lived in abject poverty, and Jeremiah was a middle-income prophet. I didn't really know. I didn't really know where that was found in Jeremiah, but it would be a fun thing to look at. But she says he was a middle-income prophet. The Christian ethic teaches that wealth is a great responsibility, not that wealth is a sin. Later on, she says, Christians give $7 billion a year to churches and Christian organizations. That sounds like a gigantic amount until you realize that Americans in general spend the same amount yearly on chewing gum. Why not ask God if you can give more? She says, our best defense against Satan's traps, his greed traps, well, any traps, is to be certain we're living for eternal, not earthly treasure. She quotes a couple verses. She ends the chapter with them, and I really think that they're important. Psalm 119 verses 14 says, I rejoice in following your statutes as one rejoices in great riches. So we're talking about rejoicing in great riches, and the psalmist here is saying that same rejoicing, as if he's gotten so much wealth, is what the psalmist puts into following God's statutes. Then also Psalm 119 verses 36 through 37. Turn my heart toward your statutes and not toward selfish gain. Turn my eyes away from worthless things. Preserve my life according to your word. Because we might think that our life would be preserved according to our riches. But the psalmist here says, turn my eyes away from worthless things. Preserve my life according to your word. The prayer at the end of the chapter goes like this. Holy Father, forgive me. I am ruled by impulses, appetites, and desires. My treasure is earthly. Change me, motivate me, and empower me by your Spirit who indwells my weak body. I long to be content with what I have. I desire to use all you have given me for your glory. So, that's my hope and prayer for us this week, that we would think about this barrier to our contentment of greed. Thanks for watching.